Today I want to share with you guys some books that I really think are beneficial to language learning. You know, when it comes to learning languages, I think that you have two resources which are going to help you out the most. And the first one would be the internet, especially YouTube. And the second would be books. And I've talked about this book before. That's Steve Kaufmann's book, The Way of the Linguist. This book is only like $10 and it's amazing. I mean, you all know who this guy is, I'm sure, and you've all watched his videos, and I mean, he's brilliant. And he has a really good book with a lot of really important information. Starts out with his own kind of like life journey, I guess, how he learned some languages, and then it talks about how he learns some languages just at home on his own, and he talks about his whole methodology. It's very specific and very encouraging, and awesome book. And then the other book I want to talk a lot about in this video is one I recently bought. I mean, I'm not even done reading it yet, but I think it's an amazing book so far, and I just wanted to share it with you guys because I think it might be beneficial to just about everybody who is trying to learn languages. And it is called The Loom of Language: An Approach to the Mastery of Many Languages. And I'll read you the back of it, the description. Here's an informative introduction to language, its origins in the past, its growth through history, and its present use for communication between peoples. It is at the same time a history of language, a guide to foreign tongues, and a method for learning them. It shows, through basic vocabularies, family resemblances of languages, Teutonic, Romance, Greek, helpful tricks of translation, key combinations of roots and phonetic patterns. It presents by common sense methods the most helpful approach to the mastery of many languages. It condenses vocabulary to a minimum of essential words, simplifies grammar in an entirely new way, and teaches a language as it is actually used in everyday life. But this book is more than a guide to foreign languages. It goes deep into the roots of all knowledge as it explores the history of speech. It lights up the dim pathways of prehistory and unfolds the story of the slow growth of human expression, from the most primitive signs and sounds to the elaborate variations of the highest cultures. Without language, no knowledge would be possible. Here we see how language is at once the source and reservoir of all we know. Now, this book, The Loom of Language, is, I think, pretty outstanding. It's really good. It's pretty amazing. And I'll read to you the chapters. What's covered in this book. And it starts out with an introduction, and then it goes into the story of the alphabet, which is basically how the written word came to be in various languages. It talks about basically how the alphabets of various languages came into existence. It talks about Chinese characters, talks about the Hebrew system of writing, the Hebrew script, talks about Arabic a little bit, talks about the Latin and Cyrillic, all that different kinds of stuff. Talks about cuneiform. So, I mean, it covers, like, a lot. It even talks about the Japanese script and stuff. And it talks about how some languages have taken alphabets from other languages and had to adapt them to fit their own language. For instance, the Japanese taking Chinese characters, and Persian taking the Arabic system of writing, the Arabic alphabet. I mean, the Arabic script has been imposed on various languages that were not really well suited for it. Turkish, Swahili, and Persian, and there's various other ones too. But it also goes in to talk about the table manners of language, the traffic rules of language, which is like syntax, the classification of languages, and it goes into how to learn a basic word list. Because it talks about, if you learn the basic words in a language, then you'll be able to learn vocabulary, like more technical vocabulary, easier. Like when we look in a dictionary in our own language, it'll have a word like, let's see, income, and then it'll explain it in easier words, like the money that you've earned, So if you learn like the basic words in every language, you'll be able to understand the more technical words a lot easier and figure out what they are a lot quicker. And it talks about this a lot in the book. So it reminds me of like the FLR method, Lao Shu's, he's got that word list, that basic kind of words and questions and that kind of stuff that you should know. And then it goes into our Teutonic relatives, a bird's eye view of Teutonic grammar. Then it goes the Latin legacy, modern descendants of Latin. So, I mean, this book mostly focuses on European languages like that, but it gives you the history behind them. And knowing the history, I think, is important when you're learning a language. And then it goes into the diseases of language, like the things that could make a language hard to learn, the things you'll have to overcome. And then it goes into pioneers of language planning, and language planning for a new order. And then it has, at the end, a language museum, which is the basic vocabularies for the Teutonic languages, which Teutonic is basically Germanic languages, kind of interchangeable, if you didn't know. It has basic vocabularies for the Romance languages. And then it talks about Greek roots in common use for technical words of international currency. So this book has a great methodology that I think people should look at it. You should check out this book. It's more on the spendy side though. It's like $20. But when I go into bookstores and look for books on language learning and language methodologies and that kind of stuff, just in case you're wondering, they're usually found in the philosophy section, which surprised me. You'd think they put it by the language learning books, like Teach Yourself or Colloquial, that type of stuff. But it's not. And it's in the philosophy section. I mean, I guess it kind of makes sense because it's like the philosophy of learning languages. But that's where you'll find them usually. And then this book, a lot of people who know anything about linguistics might have heard of this book, but it's Course in General Linguistics. And that's basically what it is. And it talks about, linguistics, like what it is. And basically what linguistics is, for those of you who don't know, linguistics is to describe all known languages, record their history. This involves tracking the history of language families and, as far as possible, reconstructing the parent languages of each family. It's to determine the forces operating permanently and universally in all languages, and to formulate general laws which account for all particular linguistic phenomena historically attested. To delimit and define linguistics itself. And I think for anybody who's learning languages, linguistics isn't a bad thing to learn. It's the, scientific analysis of what language is. So if you like science and you like language, that's something you should definitely get your hands on. Because, it'll help you. Even if you don't like science too much, or linguistics is kind of not your thing, still try and look up the basics of linguistics, because it'll help you learn a language as you learn about the history and that kind of stuff of the language and how it's used in the grammar and all that kind of stuff. I think it's important. I like to read about it.